well, hello everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Closing the Digital Skill Divide, New Data and Implications for Adult Education Advocates. Today, our webinar is generously sponsored by Burlington English, and we have today with us Robert Breitbart, who's going to say a few words. Robert?
Thank you, Mr. Bonney, and thanks to everybody out there for joining in on such an exciting presentation today. I shared that Amanda, I felt like she was the Paul Revere of everything digital here. So we are super excited at Burlington to be able to help bring this to you. And as we're thinking about this, just know if you're familiar with Burlington English, then you know that we really give you a way to bring digitally enhanced career study to just about everything you're offering to adult ESL students. So what better way to learn about the usage of digital for our students than in context? So we've got that with using your computer that really brings it to life for many of our students who are taking their very first digital steps. So it gives you everything you need. Again, for those students, once again, just taking their first steps. And then we do it in context, right? So we start, and since we're talking about much of what Amanda will talk about, started about the workplace, well, let's get students thinking about the workplace and let's get them thinking about it early. So, you know, the understanding that in our worlds that we've got lots of career help for them. And in Burlington Core, we start them thinking about that right away. And then as many teachers will tell me, just as I was as a ESL teacher for many years, but I wasn't a trained career counselor. So we bring resources to your ESL teachers to help them explain and build awareness with students that we're here for them through their entire career pathway, and we'll help them build it, and we'll help them explore careers, and with Burlington English, make the right choices for what careers to get into right now and for future career studies such as IET. And as we know, you put goals down on paper or digitally, and you have a better chance of carrying them out. So we pull this all together and we help you build a career pathway for the students, get their goals set and reach their goals. We'd love to help you, and I've got dozens and dozens of colleagues out there who are ready to do that. So please reach out to us at burlingtonenglish.com/contact. And I do hope I'll see everyone either virtually or on site if you can make it to CoAbe in Atlanta. And with that, I'll turn it back over to James and this great presentation by Amanda. Thank you, friends.
Robert, thank you so much. And thank you again, Burlington English, for sponsoring today's webinar. We appreciate you. Thank you. All right. Our presenter today, Amanda Bergson-Shilcock. She is the Senior Fellow at the National Skills Coalition, where she leads the organization's work on adult education, digital skills, and workforce policies to expand opportunities for US-born and immigrant adults. You can say hello to her in the chat box. Let us know where you're calling in from today. I see that a lot of people are doing that already. If you have questions during her presentation, feel free to submit those in the Q&A box. And with that, I'll turn it over to Amanda. Thank you.
Thanks so much, James. Thanks to CoAbe for hosting this webinar. I'm really excited to talk with all of you today. I'm really appreciative to Robert and Burlington English for sponsoring this conversation. I think it really emphasizes how many of us in the adult education field are both excited and really kind of eager to make sure that useful information gets out to all of you, whether you're a practitioner who's teaching directly, running a program as an administrator, a state or local leader. I see a lot of familiar names in the chat. I see a lot of new friends in the chat. I'm delighted to be joining you all this morning from chilly and rainy Philadelphia. And I'm especially grateful to all the airline and other workers who helped me get here to be here to talk to you. I was in San Antonio this week for the National Digital Inclusion Alliance Conference and just got back this morning thanks to those overnight storms in Dallas, which I know are about to hit the rest of the country. So may you be safe and warm wherever you are. I'm going to make these slides full screen in a second. So one thing I just want to reassure and reaffirm for folks, you will get a PDF of these slides after today's event, along with a recording. I think COA will be sending that out early next week. So if you're the kind of person who likes to take notes, you can feel free to do that, but you shouldn't feel that you need to scribble everything down, because you won't get the slides, because you will get the slides and you will get the recording of this conversation. So today's conversation, I'm going to share with you some results from National Skills Coalition's recent research. I'm going to talk about what it means for adult educators and adult learners. I'm going to give you some very specific examples of how you can take action, and I know many of you are already doing this, and then we'll cover your questions. I probably will not see questions that are popping into the chat as we're talking, but I certainly will see them at the end, so feel free. Please use the Q&A box if you can, if you have a question related to what you're hearing from me, but also please feel free to share your own experiences in the chat. I know many of you are working on these issues with your learners, in your programs, with your employer partners, and it's definitely not the case that all of the expertise is resting, with one person presenting this webinar. There's a lot of expertise from hundreds of you on the call today. So you know this, but I just want to affirm it, right? The digital divide is definitely not just about making sure that everybody has broadband internet access and a computer. It is also about making sure they have the skills they need to be able to use those tools effectively. And so National Skills Coalition, knowing that the reason that many folks enroll in adult education, enroll in digital skill building, is because they want to get a job or they want to get a better job, we said, let's look at what employers are actually asking for in terms of digital skills. And let's do that by analyzing millions of help wanted ads. And so that's what we did. Many of you who work for state agencies may know that your partners who run the LMI, the labor market information, or economic development agencies might have a contract with the data analysis company Lightcast, which used to be called Burning Glass MZ or MZ Burning Glass. So we collaborated with the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta to do an analysis of millions of job ads. The average ad that was collected looks for a candidate with 8 different skills. And so what we did was we manually coded those skills, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But first, I just want to emphasize that the opinions expressed in our report are those of the authors, National Skills Coalition, and do not necessarily reflect those of the Federal Reserve System or the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. Okay, so this is our top line finding. Almost every job today requires some kind of digital skills. In particular, about half of jobs, 47%, require definitely digital skills, such as Excel or programming language, and another 45% require a likely digital skill. Right? An example of that is bookkeeping. You can do that using pen, paper, or a ledger, but most people these days use a computer program to do that. You add those together, that 47%, that 45%, you get to 92% of jobs require digital or likely digital skills. And many adult learners are in jobs that already require them to use technology skills. And many of those technological responsibilities don't require a laptop or a desktop computer. And some of you may know this from questions or examples that your learners have brought into the classroom, but I think it's worth really emphasizing, right? Your learners are probably using mobile apps. They're using scanners. They might be working with robots or even cobots, which are collaborative robots. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So I'm going to walk through some examples of how these things show up in the kinds of jobs that employ many adult learners. My guess is a lot of these examples will be familiar to you, but some may be new. The first is we interviewed one construction company as part of earlier research. They told us that their frontline construction workers who are working on job sites all over the state have to be comfortable using 5 or 6 different mobile apps every day to do things like snap a picture on a work site and submit a work order change using an RFI program on the app to the general contractor, or filling out their payroll information so that they can get paid, right? So these are folks who are often not native English speakers, perhaps they're Spanish or other language speakers. They may not have yet completed their high school education, but they're being expected to use this technology every day on the job. This is an example of a cobot, a collaborative robot, and this one is at White Castle, and it is called Flippy, and it flips, as you might expect from the name, hamburgers, right? And so we increasingly see that even in fast food, there are technology changes that are happening that employees have to keep up with. This is a picture from a food processing plant. We often think of meat processing as being cold, dirty work, and it often is cold and messy, but it's also very technological. You can see that there are actually 3 pieces of tech in the photo here, right? You have the woman at the left who's holding a digital device. You have the scanner that's on the table there with the blue background, and then you have the HMI, the human machine interface, for the other safety and order processing technologies that the other workers are using. Warehouse and logistics workers, right? How many of us have adult learners who are working in Amazon warehouses, and they're always using apps to handle digital order picking, processing, inventory changes, price changes, shipment tools. Medical office staff, even people who used to have a job as a receptionist, are often now having to help troubleshoot telehealth for patients who might be elders or might have disabilities and are trying to log in to telehealth apps or programs in order to access the medical care that they need. I'm seeing a couple of requests for closed captions, but I also see a note here that a participant has enabled closed captioning. So James, if there's anything that you can share in the chat to clarify for folks about captioning, we'd like to make this as accessible as possible. So if you can answer that question, that would be terrific. Continuing on with the examples of digital skills in real life, we also see that some food service companies are doing safety training in virtual reality, right? Some of you have heard me share this example before, but both the fast salad company Honeygrow and Kentucky Fried Chicken have done food safety training using VR goggles for their workers. In ag, workers who are operating tractors or combine harvesters need to be able to use the onboard computers to navigate, to help determine the amount of fertilizer or water that needs to be added for the crops, and otherwise engage in the kinds of sort of precision agricultural tasks that modern farming requires. And for some of you, I know the Refugee Federation Service Center in Seattle was training immigrant refugee adult learners to work in Boeing in aerospace manufacturing. Some companies like Boeing and Airbus are experimenting with augmented reality to help teach folks. You might think you don't know what augmented reality is, but if you've ever used a Snapchat filter or used the IKEA app to see how furniture might look in your home, you have indeed used it. It's really just using a digital device like a tablet or a smartphone to look at something in the real world and then see an animation layered on top of that. So the bottom line is that the entry-level positions that employ many adult workers today already are requiring different kinds of digital skills and technology skills. And that's true even for jobs that require 0 to 2 years of experience. So very limited work experience or even no work experience at all. You can see half of those jobs require a definitely digital skill. 95% of those jobs require a likely digital skill. We also know that the jobs that adult learners are excited about getting promoted into, those that they can move into when they acquire a high school diploma or an associate's degree, those overwhelmingly require digital skills, as you can see again circled here in yellow. We often hear, oh, this might be a problem that is being solved by the retirement calendar. Older workers might be retiring and younger workers are all digital natives and they don't need any help. Neither of those statements are true. Older workers are often very comfortable with technology, and it's important not to underestimate them or engage in stereotypes about their skills. And younger workers often have fragmented knowledge. So they might be very comfortable with certain tasks like making a TikTok video, sending text messages, but not so comfortable with other types of tasks. So just again, on the question around captioning, I am seeing a note from James that captioning should be enabled. So if folks are still having trouble with the captions, please put that in the chat. I'm seeing several questions about it, and I want to make sure that we're as accessible as possible. In fact, I'm just going to be typing a quick answer in case folks can't hear me. I'll put that in the Q&A so the person who asked that question can see that we've tried to address it. Thanks, James, for doing that. And I know that when COABE posts this online, there may also be captions that can be posted there, and I'm happy to work with COABE or YouTube to make sure that those are accurate captions if need be. So when we think about age of workers, right, we can't assume that adults of any ages in our classroom already have all the tech skills they need. The reality is that almost all of them are going to be comfortable with some skills, not comfortable with others. And so our role as adult educators is to help them build bridges from the skills they have to the skills they need. When we looked across industries, we saw that the demand for tech skills ranges very widely across all industries. So this is not just about IT jobs or finance sector jobs, as you've just seen from the examples that I shared. Industries like construction and manufacturing and food services still have really high demand for digital skills. And we see that learners need both foundational and industry-specific skills. So what do we mean by industry-specific? Well, let's talk about foundational first. So foundational skills are kind of baseline skills that let you build to other additional skills. The kind of generic term of computer literacy comes up literally millions of times in job postings, right? Or simple data entry or simple typing skills. But these are not enough. Almost every worker also needs industry-specific skills. And you can see here the percentage of jobs that also require at least one industry-specific digital skill. These numbers would be even higher if we included the likely digital skills. So this is a conservative list of only the definitely digital skills that require industry-specific examples. And you can see that as the job requires more education, the percentage requiring an industry-specific skill goes up, but it's still pretty high for jobs at the high school diploma level. It's almost half of those jobs. We also see that there are some industry-specific skills that have especially high demand across the country. Not a surprise to any of you, healthcare, electronic medical record software is in huge demand in every part of the country. Whether you're a CNA, a licensed practical nurse, a phlebotomist, a medical assistant, a nurse, a doctor, whatever your role is, you need to be comfortable using electronic health records, right? Enterprise resource planning software, whether it's by Oracle or SAP or any other company, huge in the manufacturing sector. Retail, point of sale systems, e-commerce tools. One person that I talked to when we released this report said that when she was a cashier at Urban Outfitters, she had to be comfortable with 4 different databases and switching back and forth between them very quickly as a cashier as customers were coming through. And if you couldn't adapt and switch, then they would cut your hours or lay you off. Right? So these are just a handful of examples from across the country, but we really wanted to illustrate how broad the demand is. So the kind of take home from all of this is not that there is a single magic list of skills that everybody should focus on, but more that learning digital flexibility and to some degree, resilience is really important. And that's something that we as educators already know how to facilitate, right? We teach people traditional literacy and numeracy skills with that same idea of transferability, right? Oh, okay, so I figured out how to do math skills for this recipe. Now I can also apply math skills to my household budget. Oh, I figured out how to read a bus schedule. Now I can also figure out how to read my child's after-school sports schedule, right? We already do that in a million different ways with our learners. Helping learners develop a sense of agency and a sense of self-efficacy is crucially important because we're never going to be able to help them learn every single type of technology they're going to be confronted with. We want to make sure that they are comfortable adapting as the technology changes in front of them. I did want to flag some advocates have identified some concerns with the term resilience because they're concerned that it suggests that communities that have been marginalized or vulnerable because of structural racism or other kinds of historic inequities are now being expected to kind of bounce back and be resilient. So there's some debate about whether we should be calling it digital resilience or something else, but I wanted to kind of illustrate to folks what some of the concepts are that we are trying to think about in terms of supporting our learners. And of course, this is really key, right? This is not just theoretical. Remember when we talked about learners saying that the reason they're enrolling in education is very often because they want to get a job or they want to get a better job. This is the payoff, right? Jobs that require even one definitely digital skill have a median hourly wage that is 23% higher than jobs that don't require any digital skills. And as you learn more digital skills, so if the job requires 3, 5, 7, or 9 different digital skills, that average or median hourly wage continues to go up in a kind of perfect stair step. And you might be thinking, yeah, but how many jobs really require 9 different digital skills? And the answer is 2.1 million jobs. There are a lot of jobs in this country that require workers to have multiple types of digital skills. So there's a real payoff for our learners as they build these skills. And there's a payoff for our broader economy, because of course, as people start to earn more in wages, they also can contribute more in terms of taxes, which contributes as well via overall economic vitality in terms of consumer spending, right? So if you're earning more money, you might stop and buy a lunch from the street vendor outside your office, or you might buy your child a nicer pair of shoes, and that's keeping more money circulating in the economy and creating greater economic vitality. I see we're still having some closed captioning issues. I want to emphasize again that I will make sure that the video recording that ultimately comes out of this does have captioning, and I'm going to put a little note in the chat to that effect right this moment, just so that if folks are wondering, I don't want to leave anybody out of this discussion because of accessibility reasons. So I'm just going to put a little note about that in the chat right this moment. Okay, so I will, we certainly don't want folks to be left out of the conversation for accessibility reasons. We also see a question here about whether slides will be shared later. Yes, we will absolutely be sharing the slides with everyone next week. So you won't have to frantically take notes or take photos of the screen right now. So now I've shared a lot of information with you. And there are things that you can do right now to make sure that the information that I've just shared with you actually pays off for your learners and the communities that you work in. And the first and most important thing you can do is advocate with your state partners to make sure that the Digital Equity Act and the BEAD funding in your community are used to expand digital skills training. Maybe you already know what the Digital Equity Act is. Maybe this is the first time you're ever hearing the term. Maybe you know what BEAD is, maybe you don't. I'm going to take just a minute now to walk you through what these pieces of legislation are and how you as an adult educator can take action on behalf of your learners. And if you have learners themselves who want to engage in advocacy, that's even better. So the Digital Equity Act passed as part of the infrastructure bill that Congress passed in November of 2021. That huge infrastructure bill that funds jobs and roads and bridges and transportation and energy and a huge range of things, and also puts billions and billions and billions of dollars into broadband internet access and digital equity. It's $2.75 billion going from the federal government to the states over the next 5 years. And as you know, WIO Title II or ASLA funding for adult education is less than $1 billion a year. And WIO Titles I and II together are a little over $3 billion a year. The co-sponsors of the Digital Equity Act were really clear about making sure that education and workforce issues were woven throughout the language of the Digital Equity Act. And the covered populations that every state has to serve through the Digital Equity Act overlap with so many of the adult learners in our classroom. It's people living below 150% of poverty. It's people who have disabilities. It's people with limited literacy. It's people of color. It's people who live in rural areas. It's people who are English learners, right? And so you can see this long list on the slide here. These are all the communities that your state is on the hook for in terms of closing equity gaps for digital access, meaning broadband at home, digital devices, and digital skills. So the money that's coming to your state is intended to reach exactly the kind of people that you're serving in your adult education classrooms. So what's the timeline for this funding to come to your state? This calendar year, your state is engaged in a state digital equity planning process that the federal government requires. By December of this year, your state will be submitting that plan to the federal government. And then soon after that, the feds will be releasing, and this is all the acronyms on the slide here. So NTIA is the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. That's the government agency in the US Commerce Department that oversees this funding. And the NOFO is the Notice of Funding Opportunity. It's what most of us would think of as an RFP or a request for proposals. The formula funding will go to every state automatically. And then your state will turn around and re-grant that money down to the local level. There'll be a separate NOFO for competitive grants that states and nonprofits can compete for. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But the important takeaway here is your state digital equity plan, which is getting drafted right now, will be the roadmap for how your state spends those millions and millions of dollars in formula funding that it will have over the next 5 years. So what can you actually do? You can go to the federal Internet for All Gov website and choose your state on the map. And then you'll see the contact person for your state broadband office or your state digital equity plan contact. If you're not already in touch with that person, it will have that person's email address and phone so that you can be directly in touch with them. The digital equity planning process looks a bit different in each state, but every state is required to do stakeholder engagement. Some are having public meetings, some are forming work groups, some have task forces or advisory committees. Every plan is also required to be released for a 30-day public comment period. And that probably will happen a bit later this year. The exact deadlines will differ by state. So that's why you want to go to the internetforall.gov website and make sure that you have your state person contact. So what about after your state finishes its digital equity plan? Your state's administering entity, which is the state agency that's in charge of this money, might be your state broadband office, might be your state labor agency, could vary, will get this formula funding from the federal government and re-grant it down to local partners. And we don't yet know how that's going to look. will your state do an open RFP, or will there be some other kind of process? This is another reason why it's really important to get to the table now to help shape how your state is thinking about this. Then there's that second pot of funding that I talked about, the competitive grants. So the formula funding comes to every state. The competitive grants are things that either state agencies or nonprofits or other organizations can apply for. So this language on the slide here comes directly from the federal government. It is a list of all the kinds of organizations that are allowed to apply for these grants. Where it says not a school, what they mean is not a K-12 school. Where it says community anchor institution, that is an umbrella definition that includes community colleges, right? So many of these, including the nonprofit organization category, will include a lot of adult education programs. So what kind of services could you provide if your organization got one of these competitive grants? Well, the feds have a whole list of services that you could provide, but here's the most important thing. Training programs for covered populations that cover basic, advanced, and applied digital skills, right? And so again, covered populations was that list that I shared with you before. People of color, low-income folks, folks who are veterans with disabilities, limited literacy, limited English, all the folks that you are already serving in adult education classrooms. So you've got a year to plan for these competitive grants coming out from the federal government. This is the time to get together with your partners and figure out, do we want to be a coalition applying for this? Who wants to be the lead agency? Do we have the bandwidth to do a federal grant application and manage the kind of audits they require? You've got a year. You could do some good planning. And the law also provides some very specific definitions of digital inclusion and digital literacy, which I just pasted in here for your later reference. So that's the first and most important thing you can do with our findings, which is, can you take these findings from our report and use them to inform your state digital equity planning process to make sure that the needs of your adult learners are being met and responded to as your state's developing its digital equity plan. What else can you do with these findings? You can combine these findings with census data to help you better target digital skill building services through your adult education programs. We've included 2 appendices to our report, one that is for North Carolina and one that is for Illinois. But I'm happy to chat with you if you're not in one of those states and you want to think about how you can use census data to address some of these questions. We're also encouraging folks to advocate with their state leaders to explicitly allow digital skills as part of the other kinds of policies in the state that pay for upskilling. So for example, California has just put out a $10 million workforce literacy program that is providing grants to employers to upskill incumbent workers with education partners to help those incumbent workers build English language and other foundational skills. And they have explicitly included digital skills as an allowable activity in that grant program. That's not federal money. That's not part of this Digital Equity Act that I've just been talking about. That's a California state-specific allocation. You can advocate for your state to do similar things as it rolls out other incumbent worker training or education investments. And of course, supportive services. We all already know how crucially important it is that things like childcare and transportation can support workers as they are going through upskilling programs. And that is just as true whether folks are talking about digital skills as anything else. And then finally, some of you have been advocating on this already, but short-term Pell, making sure that Pell grants become available for shorter-term high quality training programs, many of which are digital skill building programs. If you're running a community college program or a career technical education program in partnership with your adult ed partners, this is an issue that you're probably very familiar with. If not, I'm happy to talk more about it in the Q&A. So now I'm going to open it up and share your questions. As we go to your questions, I'm just going to share that I've attached a couple of resource slides at the end of this presentation that you'll have access to, and I'll just quickly show you those before we go into the Q&A. We invite you to sign on to National Skills Coalition's Digital Equity Principles. You can sign on as an individual. You don't have to do it on behalf of your organization. That will ensure that you get email updates from NSC about digital skills work. And this isn't lobbying. So even if you're a state official and you're not allowed to lobby, you can sign on to these principles. These are just broad-based principles. It's not particular advocacy around particular legislation. If you're interested in digging into the full report that I've just been sharing these highlights from, you can find that on our website, and I put the URL here. If you're interested in knowing more about the Digital Equity Act that I just talked about, we have a kind of Digital Equity Act 101 fact sheet, and we have a Digital Equity Act in BEAD, or Broadband Equity Access and Deployment, set of recommendations that I've linked here. And then we have some past research on the degree of digital skills in the workforce that may also be useful to you. And I'm highlighting those here. For those of you who are able to travel, in May, we'll be having our big federal skills summit in Washington, DC, and we'd love to see you there. So I'm going to stop sharing now and go back to the Q&A screen and see if there are folks who have submitted questions. Okay. So there are some questions that have already started to come in. So there's a question about whether the transcript of the presentation will be included with the video. I'm not sure the answer to that question. I'm going to let James weigh in on that in chat if he has an answer to that. There's a question about whether each state's funding entity for the formula funds is the same as the contact person listed on the Internet for All website. The answer to that is almost certainly yes, but it is possible that your governor has listed a different contact person than the agency that's in charge of the funds. But in most cases, yes, the state that will oversee the formula funds is the same as the state agency person that's listed on the Internet for All website. And if you have any questions about that, I'm happy to chat offline if folks have specific examples. I'm seeing a question, a broad question, which I think is really interesting, but I think beyond the scope of what I can address here, which is how can we get our students to become digital citizens? The concept of digital citizenship is very broad-based, and a lot of folks have done thinking and talking and writing about this, including the American Library Association, as well as a number of other tech advocates. It's a wonderful, rich, important question. I don't think I'm qualified to answer it right now. What I will say is that your students absolutely can and should be part of the digital equity planning in your state. There's a public comment process. There are public meetings. Encouraging your students to engage in that process is really, really important. So I see another question about whether digital skills includes things like blogs or Google Earth or podcasts. The short answer is yes. Digital skills are quite broad, right? So they can include things like, are you using a handheld scanner? Are you using a smartphone app? In general, just listening to a podcast is not really a digital skill, but certainly downloading and installing a podcast app on your phone or creating your own podcast would certainly be digital skills. So I hope that answers that question. I am seeing some more great questions, which I will get to in a second, but I'm also seeing a request that we drop in the link to our report. So let me do that just so that folks have that link more easily. The URL was on the slide, but I know you won't have the slides till next week, and some of you might want to might want to dig in faster. So let me make sure that I put that in the chat so that you all can take a look at that. Okay. No, and just as a note, the report itself is only 12 pages long, and the executive summary is 4 pages long. The PDF of the full report is 58 pages long because it includes the North Carolina appendix and the Illinois appendix and our methodology section. So don't be intimidated if you open up the PDF and you think, oh my goodness, it's 58 pages. It's not, it's 12 pages. Okay. So a few other questions I see that have come in. There's a question here about what kind of changes would take legislation. And Deborah, if you want to elaborate on your question in the chat, I'd be happy to explore that more. I'm not sure I fully understand it. I see Jennifer's comment about using census information, and there certainly has been a lot of undercounting of immigrants, not just in the census, but in other data sources. So for sure, that's an important consideration. Really important question from Darla. Does the digital learning have to lead to a certificate or employment to be eligible for the Digital Equity Act? So no, there is nothing in the federal statute, in the law that Congress passed, that says you have to get a job in order for the digital equity funding to be covered. It is about teaching skills. That being said, the federal government has just released a request for information, so for the field to provide public comments about how they're going to approach some of these issues. And so I'm going to link to that in the chat as well. So when they release the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, they've asked for input from the field before that NOFO comes out. So let me pull that up for you. And that is called the Digital Equity Act Request for Comment. Equity Act Request Comment, RFC. The deadline is May 1st, 2023 to submit comments. One really important point, the federal Digital Equity Act statute language does not require a particular immigration status or identification for people that participate in digital equity programming. I have been talking with federal officials to make sure that they can put out an FAQ to inform the states and local partners that this means, for example, if you're returning from incarceration and you don't have a government ID yet, if you've aged out of foster care or you're unhoused and you don't have a permanent address, if you're an undocumented immigrant and you either don't have a driver's license or you don't, obviously, if you're undocumented, you don't have a social security number, that you could still participate in Digital Equity Act funded programs. Congress did not put any restrictions on that. And so I'm pushing the federal agencies to make sure that they explicitly announce that to the states so that the states don't make up any extra rules that might exclude participants who otherwise should be able to participate. I see the clarification from Deborah in the chat. Yes, the kind of Pell Grant changes that we were talking about would take legislation. And so there's legislation called the Jobs Act in Congress right now that would expand Pell eligibility for short-term programs. But some states have created their own state-level short-term funding in the absence of the feds having done anything on short-term Pell. So happy to answer follow-up questions on that via email. A question again from Darla, can you embed digital literacy into an existing ABE ESL program or must it be a standalone course? Emphatically, yes, it is great to embed in existing programs. Definitely don't think about this as something that has to be its own separate course. Now, what the details of that need to look like as you submit applications either to your state agency to get the formula funding or to the federal government to get the competitive grants, those we won't know until the Notice of Funding Opportunity comes out in at the end of this year or the beginning of next year. But that's why it's important to weigh in on that request for comment period right now with the feds, and to weigh in on your state digital equity planning, because what you want to be doing is explaining to them digital skills work when you learn them in the context of real life, when you learn them in the context of English language training, when you learn them in the context of career technical education, right? So really being explicit about that to the feds is an important component of making sure that they write their NOFO as broadly as possible. So we also have a question here about BEAD. So let me talk a little bit about BEAD for a second. So BEAD is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. And it is, I'm putting that in the chat here. It is $42 billion to the states over the next 5 years. And it is intended to get broadband to people who don't have it at all, who are considered unserved, get broadband to people who have slow internet connections, which is considered underserved, and to support workforce development of new workers in the broadband field. I heard a beautiful story yesterday from Louisiana. A community college in northern Louisiana created a fiber optic technician training program for incarcerated folks who were on work release. And those incarcerated folks became trained as fiber technicians and just had their first graduation ceremony, so that now as they're leaving prison, they're leaving with a credential that will allow them to support their families and contribute and participate in this BEAD-funded broadband work that's going to be happening over the next decade or so here in the United States. So in some states, the state agency in charge of the digital equity funding and the digital and the BEAD funding is the same agency. And in some states, they have put one agency in charge of digital equity funding and the other agency in charge of BEAD funding. And very often, the folks who are running these programs are broadband experts. They are not educators. They are not workforce experts. And that's another really important thing to think about as you are weighing in on your state digital equity planning process. There's also a 5-year BEAD action plan that the states are required to do. Making sure that you as an educator kind of get in there and get the ear of your state policymakers to help them understand why adult education should be at the table, helping them think about how to get a broadband workforce they're going to need is so, so crucial. And I really encourage you to get yourselves to the table, your agencies to the table, but also get your learners to the table and make sure that they have a chance to speak for themselves about what they think is important for state leaders to know in terms of how they can contribute if they're given the opportunity. I'm going to put another link in the chat, which is our state policy recommendations around BEAD. So give me a second here. State policy recommendations for DE and BEAD funding. Okay, so I'm just putting that in the chat here. And this is also linked in the slides. So if you're not able to quickly copy paste from the chat here, don't worry, you'll also have these in the slides that I'm sending you all. Okay, I see a question from Patricia. Do you know of any tax credits that are available for large and small businesses that may entice them to work with nonprofits that offer workplace literacy programs that include digital literacy? I'm going to answer this question in two parts. Yes, there are some tax credits that are out there. Also, tax credits are usually motivating for really big businesses because they have enough of a tax liability that they actually care about getting a discount on their tax bill, and they have enough of a cash flow that they can float the cost of a program and then wait a year or so for the federal or for the state government to reimburse them in the form of the tax credit. So tax credits are not ideal for small and mid-sized businesses because they will often say, well, we don't owe that many taxes to begin with. And, we can't really afford to spend a lot of money on a training program and then wait months or a year for the government to reimburse us in the form of a tax credit. So tax credits are kind of an imperfect tool, but they do exist. There are also other employer incentives beyond tax credits. And I talked before about California's Employment Training Panel, which is their incumbent worker training program. And I did a report a couple of years ago, and let me see if I can easily find the link to it now. It's called Funding Resilience, and it's examples of the 30 states that have some kind of incumbent worker training program. And this is something that is, in many cases, an employer incentive of some kind. Sometimes a cash incentive. Sometimes it's structured differently for different states. Let me see if I can find an easy link. And if I can't, I'll send it along afterwards. Okay, let me see here. Yes. Okay, here it is. I've got the link. Put it in the chat. Okay. Example of 30 states incumbent worker training funds. Okay, so I've just put that in the chat so that folks have access to that. We're coming to the end of our time here. I want to thank everyone for these wonderful and really rich questions. It's always so exciting to me. Please email and brag to me about the cool stuff that you are doing on digital skills and technology literacy, because I love to have real life examples that I can use in my presentations and in my conversations with leaders. I've put my email in the chat so that everyone can easily follow up with me. I know that COA will be getting back to you early next week with the recording and the slides. We're also doing state-specific briefings on this report. I've done briefings already for Colorado, Virginia, Utah, a number of other states. If you are curious about whether I've done one for your state already or whether I could do one for your state, please don't hesitate to email me and follow up. Let me go ahead and turn things back over to James to close us out here.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That was an awesome presentation. I want to apologize. I couldn't get those closed captionings activated. I was having some sort of glitch, but we will definitely look into it and get it fixed for future webinars. As a reminder, this replay will be posted to coabe.org along with the presentation materials, and it usually takes about 24 hours. Robert's still on with us. Robert, you want to say a couple words before we close out? You're on mute.
Amanda, thank you so much. And to everybody joining in, I sure hope, I know my fire's lit. I know I'm going to be going through the PowerPoint, sharing it with everybody. And and to all of you, I love, Amanda, your comment about, just great. How do we learn things? And the best way we learn is in context. And so how can we take digital, and particularly since, again, so much of this report is all about, helping our students get, family sustaining jobs and better jobs and moving through. And it's just a fact, technology is going to be part of it. So if you can help them learn English in context and help them get a job, get a better job, get into, continued training, just know all of us here at Burlington English would be thrilled to help you. So please reach out to us, burlingtonenglish.com/contact, and look forward to seeing everybody and Amanda and James in Atlanta in less than a month. So thank you, friends.
Thank you, Robert. And thank you, everybody. I look forward to Atlanta too. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you again, Amanda, for the wonderful presentation. I hope everybody has a great day and a wonderful weekend. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.